Captain Jiho Kim's cargo shuttle docked with a soft thud against Nexus Prime's massive hull. Through the viewport, he watched a Vorthak trading vessel glide past, its crystalline engines casting rainbow lights across the station's metal surface. 3 moons hung in the distance, their surfaces dotted with mining colonies that never slept. He straightened his worn leather jacket and stepped onto the bustling promenade. Nexus Prime stretched endlessly in both directions, a city floating in space where millions of beings from across the galaxy came to trade, eat, and make deals. Holographic advertisements flickered in dozens of languages, while service robots weaved between crowds of aliens. A group of wealthy Zentari merchants passed by, their blue skin shimmering with expensive biomodifications. Behind them walked their mechanical servants, tall chrome robots carrying purchases from luxury shops. The merchants spoke loudly about their latest acquisitions from the Outer Rim worlds. Jiho moved quietly through the crowd. Nobody paid attention to the middle-aged human in simple clothes. To them, he looked like any other cargo pilot or maintenance worker. Humans were common enough on the station, usually doing the jobs that other species considered beneath them. This Stellar Crown occupied an entire level of the station's upper district. Its entrance was a marvel of engineering, with walls that shifted between transparent and opaque, showing glimpses of the restaurant's interior. A massive aquarium filled one wall containing creatures from the ocean worlds of the Hadron system. Tentacled beings with bioluminescent patterns swam gracefully while small jewel-colored fish darted between coral formations that sang soft melodies. As Jiho approached the entrance, the doors recognized him with a subtle scan and slid open silently. The interior took his breath away, as it always did. The ceiling was completely transparent, offering a stunning view of the galaxy beyond. Stars stretched in every direction, and occasionally a massive starship would drift past, its lights twinkling like a mobile constellation. The restaurant buzzed with conversation in a dozen languages. At one table, a family of insectoid klaxons clicked their mandibles while sharing fermented nectar from their homeworld. Nearby, a pair of Vorthak diplomats conducted business over plates of crystallized minerals that they consumed by touching them with their energy-based appendages. Vextal, the head waiter, noticed Jiho immediately. The Zentari stood nearly 8 feet tall, his blue skin marked with the intricate tattoos that showed his high social status. His forearms moved gracefully as he directed the restaurant staff, which included floating service drones and several other aliens in pristine uniforms. When Vextal's large golden eyes fixed on Jiho, his expression shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed disgust. He glided over, his movements flowing like water, but his tone was ice-cold. "A table for the human," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain. The way he pronounced human made it sound like something unpleasant he had stepped in. Other patrons turned to look. A table of Rigelian nobles, their gem-encrusted shells catching the starlight, began whispering among themselves. At the bar, a group of traders from the mining worlds pointed and chuckled. Even the service robots seemed to pause in their duties to observe. Vextal led Jiho through the restaurant, past tables with the best views of space, past the prime seating, areas where business deals worth billions of credits were being discussed. They walked past a table where a Hadron ambassador was dining with representatives from 3 different star systems, their conversation punctuated by the soft chiming of translation devices. The corner table Vextal selected was cramped, wedged, between a service station and the entrance to the kitchen. The noise from the food preparation area was constant, and the view was blocked by a structural beam. The chair was clearly designed for a smaller species, forcing Jiho to sit uncomfortably. "Try not to embarrass yourself among civilized beings," Vextal said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Several aliens laughed, including a merchant whose ship Jiho recognized from the docking bay. Jiho settled into his seat without complaint, accepting the menu that Vextal practically threw at him. The waiter's 4 arms gestured dismissively before he glided away to attend to more important customers. The menu was a work of art, displaying holographic images of exotic dishes from across the galaxy. Each item cost more than most beings made in a month. Jiho studied it carefully, while conversations continued around him. he caught fragments of discussions about trade routes, mining rights, and territorial disputes. Information that would be valuable to someone who knew how to use it. At a nearby table, a group of Zentari merchants continued their loud conversation about humans, clearly intending for Jiho to overhear their casual insults about his species' alleged inferiority. Jiho remained perfectly calm, his weathered hands steady as he turned the menu pages, occasionally glancing up at the spectacular view of space beyond the transparent ceiling. 20 minutes passed before Vextal bothered to return to Jiho's corner table. The Zentari waiter moved with deliberate slowness, stopping at 3 other tables first to take orders and chat pleasantly with the alien customers. At each stop, he would glance toward Jiho's corner and smirk, making sure his delay was obvious. During the wait, Jiho watched the restaurant's fascinating dynamics. A pair of Vorthak engineers were sketching plans on a holographic display, designing some kind of space station component. Their crystalline fingers moved through the air, creating 3-dimensional blueprints that rotated slowly above their table. At another table, a family of Rigelians was celebrating something, their shell-like bodies glowing with soft bioluminescence that pulsed in rhythm with their emotions. Through the transparent ceiling, a massive cargo hauler drifted past, its hull scarred from countless journeys through asteroid fields. Smaller ships buzzed around it like insects, probably conducting inspections or transfers. The sight reminded Jiho of his early days piloting similar vessels through dangerous space. Sains. When Vextal finally approached, he carried himself with exaggerated importance. His forearms moved in flowing gestures as he spoke to other customers, but when he reached Jiho's table, his entire demeanor changed. The graceful movements became sharp and dismissive. "What does the primitive want to eat?" Vextal's voice carried, clearly across the nearby tables. "Perhaps some processed rations from your cargo ships, or maybe some of that synthetic protein paste your kind seems to enjoy." The insult drew attention from across the restaurant. A table of Hadron traders paused their conversation to watch the show. Even the service robots seemed to hover closer, their sensors probably recording everything for the restaurant's security systems. Jiho looked up from the menu calmly. "I'll have the chef's special, please, and a glass of Centauri wine if you have the 2387 vintage." The request sent a ripple of surprise through the nearby tables. The chef's special was the most expensive item on the menu, a delicacy that required ingredients from 7 different star systems. The wine he'd requested was legendary, harvested from the orbital vineyards of Centauri Prime and aged in 0 gravity. Vextal's golden eyes widened, then narrowed with amusement. He threw back his head and laughed, a sound like crystal chimes being struck. The laugh was so loud and theatrical that conversation stopped throughout the restaurant. "This costs more than your species makes in a cycle," Vextal announced, his voice echoing off the transparent ceiling. "The chef's special requires Andromedan spice that's worth more than most human cargo ships. And that wine? It's older than your homeworld space program." The Zentari waiter turned to address the restaurant like a performer on stage. "Humans should stick to the lower decks where they belong, eating their nutrient paste and drinking recycled water. This establishment serves beings who have evolved beyond such primitive needs." A chorus of laughter erupted from multiple tables. The Rigelian family's shells flickered with amusement colors. The Hadron traders clicked their approval with sounds like breaking glass. Even some of the service robots seemed to vibrate with mechanical laughter. At the bar, a group of klaxon merchants began making buzzing sounds that Jiho recognized as their version of mocking laughter. One of them, wearing expensive biomodifications that made his carapace shimmer, stood up and pointed with one of his 6 arms. "Look at the human pretending to be civilized," the klaxon buzzed loudly. "Next, he'll want to use the executive restrooms or request a meeting with the station commander." This drew even more laughter. A Vorthak diplomat at a nearby table chimed in with her musical voice. "I heard humans still eat with their hands instead of proper feeding tentacles. How barbaric." Vextal basked in the attention, his 4 arms spreading wide. "Perhaps we should offer him a children's menu instead. Something with pictures to help him understand what real food looks like." The mockery continued as other patrons shared their own jokes about human inferiority. Stories about human colonies failing, about their primitive technology, about their short lifespans and limited intelligence. Each comment brought fresh waves of laughter. Through it all, Jiho remained perfectly still. His weathered hands stayed folded on the table, his expression calm and patient. He didn't react to the insults or try to defend himself. He simply waited, watching the aliens enjoy their entertainment. A small service robot approached their table, probably programmed to clear away dishes or take orders. But when it detected the commotion, it hovered uncertainly, its sensors trying to process the unusual situation. Vextal noticed the robot and had another idea. "Even our service drones are more sophisticated than human technology," he announced. "This little unit has more processing power than most human starships." The robot's lights flickered, as if it was embarrassed by the attention. It quickly retreated to the kitchen area, leaving the aliens to continue their mockery. Outside the restaurant's transparent walls, space traffic continued its endless dance. Freighters carrying goods between star systems, passenger liners full of travelers and sleek military vessels on patrol. Most of those ships had human crews, but the aliens in the restaurant seemed to have forgotten that detail. Jiho's calm demeanor never wavered, even as the insults grew more creative and the laughter louder. He waited patiently, like a man who had seen this performance many times before. The laughter in the restaurant had reached its peak when Jiho finally spoke again. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, cutting through the noise like a blade through. "Silk, I'd like to speak with your manager, please." The simple request caused another wave of amusement. Vextal's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of extreme entertainment among his species. His golden eyes sparkled with malicious joy as he looked around the restaurant, making sure everyone was still watching his performance. "Planning to complain?" Vextal's voice dripped with mock concern. "Going to tell someone that the mean alien hurt your feelings? No one will listen to a Terran beggar. This is a respectable establishment." The Klaxon merchants at the bar began making their buzzing laughter sounds again. One of them, the one with the expensive biomodifications, called out, "Maybe he wants to speak to the station commander too, or perhaps the Galactic Trade Council." This brought fresh waves of laughter from across the restaurant. A group of Hadron diplomats had stopped their important discussion to watch the entertainment. Their translucent bodies shifted colors with amusement, cycling through shades of blue and purple. At another table, a family of Rigelians was teaching their young ones about different species by pointing at Jiho. "See how the human thinks it deserves the same treatment as evolved beings," the parent explained in their musical language. "This is why they're confined to the outer colonies." Vextal basked in the attention, his forearms gesturing dramatically. "Perhaps we should call the Waste Management Division instead. They're more used to dealing with refuse." The service robots seemed confused by the situation. Their programming included protocols for handling difficult customers, but nothing about public humiliation. They hovered uncertainly around the edges of the scene, their sensors recording everything but unable to intervene. Through the transparent ceiling, a massive military cruiser glided past, its hull bristling with weapons and communication arrays. The ship was heading toward the outer rim, probably on patrol duty. Most people in the restaurant didn't even notice it, too focused on the entertainment at Jiho's table. Without any sign of anger or frustration, Jiho reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was so smooth and natural that most people missed it entirely. He pulled out what looked like a simple communication device no bigger than his palm. The technology appeared standard, the kind of comm unit that any trader or pilot might carry. The device was actually far more sophisticated than it appeared. Its surface was made from materials that cost more than most starships, and its internal components were crafted by the finest engineers in the galaxy. But to the casual observer, it looked ordinary. Jiho activated the device with a simple touch. The communication was crystal clear, transmitted through quantum channels that couldn't be intercepted or blocked. His voice remained calm and professional. "Sora, please come to the Stellar Crown. We have a situation." The brevity of the message only made Vextal laugh harder. "Sora, is that your little girlfriend? Going to have her come and protect you from the big bad aliens?" The Zentari waiter turned to his audience again. "Humans always need someone else to fight their battles. They're too weak and primitive to handle real conflict. The communication device chirped softly, indicating that the message had been received and acknowledged. Jiho calmly placed it back in his pocket, then folded his hands on the table again. His weathered face showed no emotion whatsoever. "She'll be here shortly," he said simply. This brought another chorus of laughter. The Vorthak diplomat at the nearby table chimed in with her musical voice. "I'm sure she will, dear. Perhaps she'll bring some friends from the cargo bay to help you." The mockery continued for several more minutes. Aliens shared stories about human weakness, about their failed colonies and primitive technology. The service robots tried to resume their duties, but the commotion made normal restaurant operations difficult. Then the main entrance doors slid open with a sharp hiss. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died away. Even the background music seemed to quiet down, as if the restaurant's computer systems sensed something important happening. Sora Min entered the restaurant like a force of nature. She was young, probably in her early 30s, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who commanded respect across the galaxy. Her business suit was clearly expensive, tailored from materials that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her black hair was pulled back in a professional style, and her eyes swept the restaurant with the precision of a scanning array. Behind her came station security, not the regular patrol officers, but the elite units that only responded to the most serious situations. They wore full armor suits that hummed with energy fields, and their weapons were the kind that could cut through starship hulls. Their visors were down, hiding their faces, making them look like mechanical enforcers rather than living beings. The security teams spread out efficiently, taking positions around the restaurant's exits. Their presence was subtle but unmistakable. Nobody was leaving until this situation was resolved. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the kitchen sounds from the back seemed to stop. Through the transparent ceiling, stars continued their eternal dance. But inside the stellar crown, time seemed frozen. Sora's eyes found Jiho immediately, and her expression shifted from professional concern to barely controlled anger as she took in the scene. Sora approached Jiho's corner table with measured steps, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Every eye in the restaurant followed her movement. The silence was so complete that even the soft humming of the air recycling system seemed loud. "Mr. Kim," she said, bowing deeply with perfect respect. "I sincerely apologize for this treatment. This should never have happened." The formal bow sent shockwaves through the watching aliens. In galactic business culture, such deep respect was only shown to individuals of enormous power and influence. The expensive cut of Sora's suit, the deference in her voice, and the security team's protective positioning all pointed to one impossible conclusion. Vexital's forearms began trembling, slightly. His golden eyes darted between Sora and Jiho, trying to process what he was seeing. The confident smirk had vanished from his face, replaced by growing confusion and the first hints of fear. From behind the kitchen doors emerged Grixtar, the restaurant manager. The Quellian was a nervous creature under normal circumstances, with his tentacle-like appendages constantly twitching and his large eyes always darting around for potential problems. Now he looked absolutely terrified. Grixtar's skin had shifted to a pale green color that indicated extreme distress among his species. His tentacles writhed as he hurried across the restaurant floor, nearly tripping over his own feet in his panic. He'd obviously been monitoring the situation from his office and had finally realized the magnitude of the disaster unfolding in his establishment. "Sir, honored sir," Grixtar stammered, his voice shaking like autumn leaves. This is..." He couldn't even form complete sentences. The manager turned to face Vextal, and his next words carried clearly across the silent restaurant. Every alien patron leaned forward to hear, their various forms of enhanced hearing focused on the revelation about to unfold. "This is Jiho Kim," Grixtar announced, his voice cracking with terror. "He owns this station, he owns this restaurant. He owns half the shipping lanes in this sector." The words hit the restaurant like a plasma bomb. Conversations that had been frozen in mid-sentence now died completely. Drinking glasses paused halfway to mouths. Even the service robots stopped moving, their programming struggling to process the social dynamics of the situation. Vextal's face went through several color changes, cycling from blue to pale silver to an unhealthy gray. His forearms began shaking uncontrollably as the full weight of his mistake crashed down on him. The being he'd spent the last hour publicly humiliating wasn't just another human traveler. He was one of the most powerful individuals in known space. At the Klaxon merchant's table, the one with expensive biomodifications had been reaching for his drink when Grixtar made the announcement. His 6 arms froze in place, and his carapace lost its shimmer as the biomodifications powered down from shock. The buzzing laughter sounds died in his throat, replaced by the clicking that indicated extreme anxiety among his species. The Hadron diplomats at their corner table had been in the middle of negotiating a trade agreement worth billions of credits. Now they stared at Jiho with new understanding. Every shipping lane they used, every cargo route that made their commerce possible, every trade station where their goods were processed, all of it flowed through networks that this quiet human controlled. The Rigelian family that had been using Jiho as a teaching example for their young ones now huddled together, their bioluminescent shells flickering with colors that indicated shame and fear. The parent who had made jokes about human inferiority was now trying to hush their offspring, desperately hoping that their comments hadn't been overheard. Through the transparent ceiling, the space traffic continued its endless dance. But now, the aliens in the restaurant saw it differently. That massive cargo hauler drifting past, probably owned by Kim Industries. The smaller ships buzzing around it, likely part of his logistics network. The military cruiser on patrol, protecting trade routes that generated revenue for Kim's empire. Sora stepped closer to Jiho's table, her voice professional but warm. "Should I have the restaurant cleared, sir? We can continue this conversation in private." The offer made Vextal's knees buckle. If the restaurant was cleared, if this became a private matter, his fate would be decided behind closed doors. At least with witnesses present, there were limits to what could happen to him. Grixtar was now making soft whimpering sounds, his tentacles wrapped around his body like he was trying to disappear entirely. As the restaurant manager, he was ultimately responsible for his staff's behavior. The career he'd spent decades building was probably over. The security team maintained their positions, their armor suits humming quietly with contained energy. These weren't ordinary station guards. They were the elite units that protected the most valuable assets in the sector. Their presence alone was worth more than most people's net worth. A service robot finally broke the silence, approaching cautiously with a fresh napkin for Jiho's table. Even the machine seemed to understand that the social dynamics had completely shifted. It moved with extra care, as if afraid that any sudden motion might trigger further consequences. The humble human in simple clothes who had been dismissed and mocked was revealed as the invisible hand that controlled their economic universe. Every credit they earned, every deal they made, every route they traveled, all of it existed within the vast network that Jiho Kim had built from nothing. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Jiho placed his hands on the table and slowly pushed himself to his feet. The simple movement commanded the attention of every being in the restaurant. Even the service robots seemed to hover in anticipation. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the transparent walled space. It wasn't loud or demanding, but it had the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades making decisions that affected millions of lives. "My species doesn't need to announce our achievements," Jiho said, his weathered face calm as he looked around the room. "We simply work, build, and endure." The words hit the alien patrons like a physical force. At the Klaxon merchant's table, the one with biomodifications began clicking nervously, his 6 arms fidgeting with expensive jewelry that suddenly seemed meaningless. He thought about all the human-built stations where his goods were processed, all the human-operated shipping routes that made his fortune possible. The Hadron diplomats exchanged glances through their translucent bodies, colors shifting with embarrassment. Their entire trade network depended on infrastructure that humans had quietly constructed while they'd been busy feeling superior. The irony wasn't lost on them. Through the restaurant's transparent ceiling, a formation of sleek fighters swept past, their engines leaving trails of blue light against the starfield. The aliens watching now realized these were probably human pilots, protecting the very trade routes they all depended on. Jiho turned his attention to Vextal, who was still trembling with all four arms. The Zentari waiter's golden eyes were wide. With terror, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Sweat beaded on his blue skin despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. "You have a choice," Jiho said, his tone neither angry nor forgiving, simply matter of fact. "You can spend a month learning about human culture in our quarter of the station, or you can find work elsewhere. It's entirely up to you." The offer stunned everyone. Instead of firing Vextal immediately or having him arrested by the security team, Jiho was offering education. It was a mercy that the waiter clearly didn't expect and probably didn't deserve. Vextal's antennae drooped as he considered his options. Finding work elsewhere would mean leaving Nexus Prime, probably returning to the outer colonies where opportunities were scarce. His species valued employment at prestigious locations like the Stellar Crown. Losing this position would mark him as a failure among his own people. I choose to learn, sir," Vextal whispered, his voice barely audible. "If you'll have me." Sora stepped forward, pulling out a tablet device. "I'll arrange the placement. You'll work with our cultural exchange program. There are humans who've been trying to build bridges between species for years. They'll teach you what you clearly don't understand." The restaurant manager, Grixtar, had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. His tentacles had stopped writhing, and his skin was returning to its normal color. The mercy shown to his employee was more than he'd dared hope for. "Sir," Grixtar spoke up hesitantly, "the entire staff will undergo sensitivity training immediately." "This will never happen again," Jiho nodded calmly. "See that it doesn't. This restaurant serves beings from across the galaxy. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of their species or appearance." As he prepared to leave, Jiho looked around the restaurant one final time. The Rigelian family was trying to teach their young ones a different lesson now, explaining in hushed tones about the importance of not judging others by their appearance. The children's shells flickered with curiosity rather than amusement. At the bar, a group of Vorthak traders had started a quiet discussion about the human colonies they'd always dismissed as primitive. Maybe those settlements weren't as backward as they'd assumed. Maybe there was more to learn than they'd realized. The service robots resumed their duties, but they moved differently now. Their programming had been updated with new protocols about treating all customers equally, regardless of species. The artificial intelligence systems throughout the station would be sharing this lesson within hours. Sora walked alongside Jiho toward the exit, the security team forming a protective but unobtrusive escort. As they passed the tables of alien patrons, conversations gradually resumed, but the tone was different, more thoughtful, more respectful. Through the transparent walls, space traffic continued its eternal dance. But now the aliens in the restaurant saw it with new eyes. Every cargo ship, every passenger liner, every maintenance vessel carried beings who deserved respect. The humans they'd dismissed were the ones keeping their civilization running. Near the entrance, Jiho paused and looked back at Vextal, who was still standing by the corner table where this had all begun. "Learn well," he said simply. "Understanding between species benefits everyone." The Zentari waiter bowed deeply with all four arms, a gesture of ultimate respect among his people. "I will, sir. I promise." As Jiho walked through the restaurant, doors the alien patrons watched him go with newfound respect. The quiet human in simple clothes had taught them something profound about strength, mercy, and the danger of judging others by appearances. Outside in the corridor, starships continued their journeys through the galaxy, carrying cargo and passengers. Between worlds that humans had connected with invisible threads of commerce and cooperation, the lesson would spread throughout Nexus Prime within days, shared by the aliens who'd witnessed it and learned from their mistake. The end.